Chapter 20. Luke felt 12 pairs of eyes on him. Nina's mouth was frozen in a little "oh" of surprise. Jackalboy's jaw dropped in astonishment. But nobody was more astonished than Luke. Why did I do that? He wondered. He remembered thinking that most of the boys at Hendrix acted like pawns. I'm a pawn too, remember? Just plain old Luke Garner, who doesn't know anything about anything, who cowers in the attic while his best friend dies for the cause. Stepping out from behind that tree was something Jen would have done, not me. But he had done it. Now what? Luke longed to slide back behind the tree again, or, given that it wouldn't be much of a hiding place now, to turn tail and run. But his legs were trembling so much that just standing still took all his strength. Everyone was so quiet that Luke could hear his watch ticking again. All right, he'd gotten himself into this mess by acting like Jen. What would she do next? Talk. Jen could always talk. You destroyed my garden, Luke accused. You'll have to make restitution. Luke could use big words, too. He thought he saw a glimmer of appreciation in Trey's eyes. Everyone else stared blankly. Would Jen bother explaining, or would she prefer letting them feel dumb? Garden? Jackalboy asked. What garden? That wasn't what Luke had expected. What garden? He repeated. My garden. Over there. He pointed into the dark. Last night, somebody trampled the whole thing, kicked over my beans, broke off my raspberry plants. You're the only ones I see out in the woods. Luke tried to let his anger carry him through, but all the faces in front of him looked vacant. Had he made a big mistake? Could they possibly be innocent? He finished weakly, so you owe me. Jackalboy shook his head. We don't know what you're talking about. He didn't seem to be lying, but how good was Luke at judging liars? I'll show you, Luke said impatiently. He suddenly had the notion that if he saw them looking at the destruction, he'd be able to tell by their expressions whether or not they were guilty. He turned hastily and started walking. He was surprised when he heard footsteps behind him. They'd actually listened to him, obeyed him. They made a strange procession through the woods. Luke leading the way, the other boys following with their lantern, then the girls with the dim flashlight. Luke made a few missteps and even had to backtrack once, but he circled around, hoping none of the others would notice. Finally, they reached Luke's clearing. In the moonlight, it looked desolate, just a stump and scraggly plants. It didn't look like it had ever contained a garden. There, Luke said, trying to sound wronged and indignant. His voice came out in a squeak. See these broken off raspberry plants? See the squash beans? But why do I have to show you? You know what you did. No guilt showed on their faces. They still looked puzzled. He is crazy, Jackalboy hissed. Wait a minute, Nina said. Did you guys walk back to school this way last night? Trey shrugged. We might have, he said. One of the other guys spoke up. It's not like we can tell any of the trees apart. So maybe you stepped on his garden by mistake, Nina said, and didn't even know it. I certainly wouldn't know what a garden looks like, one of the other girls said. Like this? What were you growing? Nothing, Luke muttered. He was suddenly overcome with shame. He'd felt so brave stepping out from behind that tree, just to make a fool of himself. Looking around, he could see the other boys could have missed noticing his efforts and trampled his garden by mistake. This had been a pathetic excuse for a garden. He'd been pathetic for ever thinking it was anything, let alone anything worth taking a risk for. He wished he could go back and hide behind a tree forever. Jackalboy started laughing first. You thought this was a garden? You were sneaking out here to make a garden? He asked. The others began to snicker too. Luke's shame turned into anger. So? He asked, defiant again. So, you are a lecker, Jackalboy said. He was laughing so hard he doubled over in mirth. A real lecker. You always say that, Luke grumbled. I don't even know what a lecker is. Someone from the country, Trey explained helpfully. Like a bumpkin. That's what it really means. But now the word's just kind of a general insult, like calling someone a moron or stupid. Luke thought Trey almost sounded apologetic, but that only made things worse. What's wrong with being from the country? Luke asked. If you have to ask, Jackalboy said, laughing again. He had to sit down on the rotting stump to catch his breath. Luke hoped he'd get mold smears on his pants. Want to know something even funnier? Jackalboy continued. I'm betting you're really an X-nay, too. So all those insults, Lecker, X-nay, Fonroll, they're all true. I don't know that I've ever met someone who's all three before. We'll have to come up with a new word just for you. What'll it be? Luke stared at Jackalboy and the others laughing behind him. His face burned. How could he have thought, even for an instant, that these might be kids he could trust, that he might belong with them? Leave me alone, he shouted and turned and ran. Chapter 21. Luke could hear someone crashing through the woods behind him, but he didn't look back. He'd run into the darkest part of the woods, and it took all his concentration to dodge the tree limbs that seemed to reach down out of nowhere. In fact, if Luke really wanted to terrify himself, he could think of those tree limbs as witches' arms and ghouls' fingers. He wasn't used to running through woods at night. Back home, when he'd gone outside after dark, it had mostly been for catching lightning bugs in the backyard, playing moonlight kickball with his brothers. Innocent fun. He'd been so young, back then, back home. He forced himself to run faster, but whoever was behind him seemed to be catching up. Luke zigzagged because he'd read once that that's how rabbits escape their predators. Then he slammed into a tree. He screamed in pain and reeled backwards. A dark shape pounced. Before he knew it, Luke was pinned to the ground. Luke remembered another time he'd been tackled. The first time he'd crept into Jen's house. He made a noise, and the next thing he knew, she had him face down on the carpet, and they'd become friends. This wasn't Jen. What do you think you're doing? A voice hissed in his ear. Jackalboys. You go back now during indoctrination and they'll catch you. They'll know. And then they'll come looking for the rest of us. Indoctrination? Luke guessed that Jackalboy meant the evening lecture. The name made sense. The lecture was always about how wonderful the government was. But Luke hadn't even thought about what he was running toward. He was just running away. Who will catch me? He asked. The only ones who watch are the hall monitors, and they all report to you, right? You got it, Jackalboy said. He sounded pleased. I worked hard setting up that system. The teachers didn't like hall duty anyway, and now... You can get away with anything, can't you? Luke asked, unless I tell. He didn't know what possessed him to make that threat. Maybe it was just a habit. After 12 years of being the youngest brother, he knew the power of tattling. And he knew how easily it could backfire. Make you a deal, Luke said quickly. Let me up, and I won't go back now. Answer some questions for me, and I won't tell. I'll keep your secrets. Jackalboy seemed to be considering. Finally he said, Okay. Luke scrambled and pulled away. He rubbed the side of his face. He wasn't sure if it was sore from hitting the tree or from being slammed against the ground. His hand came away wet. I'm bleeding, he said accusingly. You'll have to hide it, Jackalboy said. Are you good at hiding? Luke shrugged away the question. He knew Jackalboy was really asking something else, but Luke wasn't ready to answer. What's your name, anyway? Luke asked. Which one? Jackalboy asked. If you look at the school records, I'm Scott Renault. Out here, I'm Jason. One of those names is fake, Luke said. Somewhere in the woods, an owl hooted. Luke waited. Finally, Jackalboy answered softly, Yes. Your friends all have fake names too, Luke said. Yes. No hesitation. You're all third children who had to come out of hiding with fake ID cards, Luke said. X-nays, Jackalboy said. Is that what that means? Luke asked. You didn't know? Jackalboy asked. Where have you been all your life? Luke decided not to answer that question either. And Fonrolls? He started. Are any third children hiding or not? Why does everyone at school call each other these names? Luke asked. Is everyone here an X-nay? In the dark, Luke could barely see Jackalboy shaking his head. Haven't kids called each other X-nays and Fonrolls at the other schools you've been to? All the other places you've ever lived? Some say in the beginning the government paid people to use Fonroll and X-nay as swear words on TV and stuff. Then those words were forbidden in public broadcast, which just meant that people used them more in private. They wanted to make sure that everyone thought of third children as terrible. Luke wondered why Jen had never told him about that. Maybe I've never been to any other schools, Luke said cautiously. He said maybe. He could still deny everything if he wanted. Jackalboy laughed open-mouthed. His teeth glinted in the moonlight. Why don't you just come out and admit it? He asked. You're an ex-nay too, I know it. Luke dodged the question. Why do you harass me every night? He asked, when everyone else ignores me. It's the procedure we developed for dealing with new boys, Jackalboy said, and new girls over at Harlot School for Girls. We've discovered it's hard for shadow children when they first come out of hiding. They're overwhelmed, traumatized. Think about it. They've spent their whole lives thinking it's death to be seen, and suddenly they're expected to interact with others all day long, to sit through classes with dozens of other kids, behave normally. They freak out. Did you? Luke asked, trying to picture Jackalboy as the new kid, just come out of hiding, scared of everything. His imagination failed him. Me? Jackalboy sounded surprised. Sure, it was tough. The problem was, lots of ex-nays got so panicked, they do something really dumb. Stand up and chant the real name, start screaming, don't look at me, don't look at me. You know, totally lose it. Now, Hendrix has a lot of disturbed kids anyway. It does? Luke asked. Haven't you noticed? Jackalboy sounded amazed. The autistic kids, the one who rock and won't look at you in the eye, the phobic kids, we've got all sorts of troubled cases in there. Ever meet Raleigh Sturgeon? There's a psycho for you. So ex-nays can get away with some pretty wacky behavior at Hendrix, but the population police still got in a few good raids. That's why a lot of us ex-nays got together and planned it all out. Every time a new kid arrives, we go into emergency mode until we can tell if he's an ex-nay or not. We watch, we protect. Luke remembered the hands pushing him down into the chair that first day in his first class. But we do it all in secret. We give the ex-nay plenty of breathing room, and we just pick just one person to approach him, to be a friend. Luke thought about having to chant, I am a fawn roll 50 times, of having to do push-ups while everybody else laughed, of having to obey every single one of Jackalboy's sarcastic commands. I thought friends were supposed to be nice to you, Luke said bitterly. Maybe that's a word I don't understand either. Being too nice to an ex-nay from the start only causes trouble, Jackalboy said. They break down, they get weepy. They're so happy to find a sympathetic ear that they tell everything, no matter who else can hear. No, ex-nays need the kind of friend who can toughen them up, like I did for you. Was that what had happened? Luke felt as overwhelmed and confused as he had his first day at Hendrix. Listening to Jackalboy was like it used to be listening to Jen. They were both so sure of themselves, it was hard for Luke to figure out what he thought on his own. How can you tell if a new kid is an ex-nay or not? Luke asked, stalling. We give them a test, Jackalboy said. When they're ready, we leave a door open and make sure they see it. We stare them right in the eye. We know exactly how an ex-nay would respond, compared with a typical agoraphobe or a typical autistic kid. You've got everything figured out, huh? Luke said. Sure, Jackalboy asked. Can't you tell? Luke couldn't answer that question. He was feeling panicky again. In a minute, he was going to have to make a decision. With Jen, it had been easy. He trusted her right away. But he was older now, more suspicious. He knew that she had been betrayed. And he could be too. So you gave me the usual test, he said tentatively. Did I pass? Depends on what you call passing, Jackalboy said. He sounded cagier now, like he wasn't sure whose side Luke was on. Luke had run out of questions. Or he had lots of questions, but none of them would help him decide whether to trust Jackalboy and his friends with his secret. It'd be so nice to be able to tell, but was it worth risking his life for? Had he already risked his life by following them into the woods? Luke didn't like thinking things like that. He missed Jen all of a sudden. She was always good at turning his fear into a joke. Did you know Jen? He asked Jackalboy abruptly. Jen? Jackalboy said, his voice suddenly exuberant. Jen Talbot? You knew her too? Luke nodded. She was my neighbor. I went over to her house whenever I could, he said. Wow, Jackalboy breathed. Come on. He grabbed Luke's arm and pulled him back through the woods, all the time marveling, I can't believe you really met her. In person. It's incredible. She's legendary, you know? The low-hanging tree limbs didn't seem so frightening now. Luke and Jackalboy simply ducked. Together. A couple times Jackalboy held a branch out of the way so Luke could go first. A couple times Luke returned the favor. Jackalboy kept rushing Luke along. They burst back into the clearing where everyone else was sitting, not even talking. They appeared to have nothing to do but wait for Jackalboy. Listen, y'all. Jackalboy announced. This is unbelievable. He knew Jen. He went to her house and everything. There was a flurry of questions. What was she like? Did she tell you about the rally? How did you know her? Someone produced a bag of cookies and they all passed it around like it was a party. It was a party. It was a party where they were accepting Luke into their group, just because he knew Jen. Luke did his best to answer all those questions. Jen was amazing, he said. She wasn't scared of anything. Not the population police, not the government, not anyone, not even her parents. Luke thought about how strange it was that Jen's father worked for the population police. Mr. Talbot was like a double agent trying to help third children instead of killing them, but he hadn't been able to prevent his own daughter's death. He just barely managed to keep the population police from finding out that she had been his daughter. Luke didn't want to talk about Jen's death, just her life. She spent months planning the rally, he said. It was her statement. I deserve to exist. We deserve to exist. She wanted as many third children there as possible, out of hiding. She thought the government would have to listen. She took everyone to the steps of the president's house. Luke remembered the fight they'd had when he'd refused to go, and how she'd forgiven him. He stopped talking, lost in grief. The government killed everyone at the rally, Nina finished for him. Luke nodded blindly. He couldn't ignore Jen's death. He choked out, Jen was a true hero. She was the bravest person I'll ever know. And someday everyone will know about her. The others nodded solemnly. They know how I feel, Luke marveled. And then, in spite of his grief, he felt a shot of joy. I am one of them. I belong. After that, somehow, he was able to tell happy stories about Jen. He had the whole crowd laughing when he described how Jen had dusted for his fingerprints the first time he'd gone to her house. She wanted to make sure I was... Luke hesitated. He had been about to say another shadow child like her. But that wasn't how he wanted to reveal his secret. Just letting it slip out didn't matter. He finished lamely, she wanted to make sure I was who I said I was. So, Jackalboy said, lounging against a tree, who are you anyway? What's your real name, Lee? Luke looked at the circle of faces surrounding him. Jackalboy's question had silenced the laughter. Or maybe it was Luke's sudden stammering. Now everyone was watching Luke expectantly. An owl hooted somewhere deeper in the woods, and it was like a signal. Finally, it was time to tell. Luke started, but the word stuck in his throat. All those nights he'd whispered his name, all those times he'd longed to speak his name aloud, and now he couldn't. Some of the dry cookie crumbs slid back on his tongue, and he started coughing, choking. One of the other boys had to pound him on the back before Luke got his breath back. Lee Grant, Luke said as soon as he could speak again. His urge to confess was gone. My name is Lee Grant. Sure, Jackalboy kidded him, whatever you say. And then Luke felt foolish. Jackalboy had revealed his real name. Why couldn't Luke reveal his? Because, Luke thought with a chill, I didn't decide to belong. Jackalboy decided for me.